Welcome to another exciting edition of Near Mint Comic Radio, your local comic shop shrunk down, gamma irradiated, sworn to protect a world that fears and hates it, and aired live every week only on the Non-Productive Network, the only place that would have us. I'm your host Frank, joined in the studio, as always, by Pete and James. On Near Mint, we rank and review comics from best to worst. That's mint, near mint, good, fair, and poor to you newbies, and try to guide you on what to read and what might be better to avoid. On this very special season of Near Mint, we are reading through Jonathan Hickman's run on Powers of 10, House of X.
Hoxpox.
That's right, the new X-Men series that is very difficult to say out loud when you're saying them together. This week, we are covering everything, including Powers of 10-3, an interesting development in this Hickman run.
Yeah.
This Hoxpox.
This was a very different Powers of 10, because traditionally we've been jumping almost equally between the different powers of 10 years away.
Right.
You know, X0, X to the 1, X to the 2, X to the 3.
Right. The 1 year, 10 year, 100 year, and 1,000 years into the future of the X-Men universe.
This one we're focused pretty squarely on of the 100 years in the future.
Right, which is just to remind everyone, that's kind of like the quasi Days of Future Past era, that it's the near future, things have gone to pot, X-Men are on the run, hunted down, that deal. The era when some of the X-Men could still plausibly be alive. Right, especially those with super healing factors, like one of our favorite characters. Of course, I'm talking about
Sabretooth?
Yeah, no.
Deadpool?
No. Wolverine has a big role in this.
Yes.
Also Apocalypse. It's Apocalypse's team. So this is kind of interesting.
It's Apocalypse now.
Yeah, there's a kind of an interesting twist. We got a lot of player dynamic switching in this, where you expect Professor X to be the hero leader, right? And then we get thrown a curveball because he and Magneto are working together, and that typically happens pretty often in the comics over the run. It's supposed to be pretty controversial when Magneto gets into play, and he's part of the good guy team. But this one kind of flips it around immediately, and Apocalypse is, in fact, in charge of the last of the mutant resistance.
Matter of fact, we don't really see much of Professor Xavier and Magneto at all in this issue.
Yeah, by the time we get to I'm not going to do that, 100 years in the future, which I guess is X2, am I right on that one?
That's, X2.
Yeah, hooray. By the time we get there, the leadership has been supplanted entirely, and we only have Apocalypse, effectively. Apocalypse and his horsemen. Apocalypse is now the leader of the mutant resistance. He's the last man standing, or the last leader standing, and he's got his 4 horsemen with him. He's got Wolverine as War. Is this the first time that Wolverine has ever been War or been a horseman?
I'm trying to remember if he's been War. I believe he was Death at one point.
There's only one thing he does, but he does it well in many different ways. So Wolverine is War in this. Zorn is Death, which I thought was fun to see. And then we got a couple of new characters, or new versions of characters. Do we remember who Pestilence is? It's
North, I think. Was the name they gave?
Yeah, we've seen her in Powers of 10 already, and then there's Cypher and
the Cypher Krakoa hybrid.
That's right,
dude,
who is kind of an interesting end game for where Krakoa is heading.
If you see somebody who looks like an Ent, that's that's who we're talking about.
That's here. Right. So we get a little splash of some new horsemen, and you get Apocalypse. For me, the most fascinating thing is Apocalypse as leader of mutant resistance, because you've now erased any lines. Right. There's always the question of whether Apocalypse or Magneto has taken things too far. That's the trope in these books. Right. These are the leaders that are too aggressive, too bad, especially Apocalypse. He's definitely he's a step towards genocide, right? Wiping out humanity. There's no subjugation. The only way we can stay alive is by fighting back. This is pure, unadulterated bad. Yeah, he's the leader.
Yeah, he's amoral evolution.
Right. But of course we find him as leader. So what did you think, James, as a new reader? What do you think about that? Seeing Apocalypse on the stage as the leader of the mutant resistance?
I honestly thought it was really cool. I think it kind of signifies just how far, and how bad things have gotten. I think as you said, Frank, like normally Magneto and Apocalypse are kind of the sign that things have gone too far in the wrong direction. To fight this evil, to fight these machines and everything they're dealing with, that you would need Apocalypse is, just kind of awesome and also kind of crazy.
What about you, Pete? You've been reading for a while.
I think it makes perfect sense for Apocalypse to be in charge of the mutants. He's a natural leader who's always taken that hard stand that mutants should be the ones in charge and not man or machines by extension. I think the lineup for his 4 horsemen actually goes a long way towards saying how bad things are. If these are the 4 best that he can pick for his elite.
We couldn't even match them up with which horsemen they were because the narrative threads are weak at best. These are, not the best fit for what's going on, but it's interesting.
And for those of you who don't remember, Cypher is the young blonde guy that you saw in the very first House of X #1.
Right.
Who was developing the language with Krakoa.
Yeah. And, a deep cut for X-Men fans, been around for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Has
He's one of my favorites.
Interesting mutant ability that a lot of people kind of overlook, but used in a cool way in these books so far. So I'm going to leave you with a question before we get into the meat of what happens in this book. I'm actually not going to leave you. I'm going to ask you guys a question. Was Apocalypse right? The Apocalypse we know from regular, everyday continuity. Knowing what we know about the future of mutant kind and humanity in the world, is Apocalypse right? Because, that's what we're led... This isn't just a what-if tale, right? We know that because mutants were beaten back so severely that in the 100-year timeline in X2, the only person left to lead them is Apocalypse, and Apocalypse is our greatest, best hope to save mutant kind, which is what he kind of has been saying more or less all along. He and Magneto and others, the idea that there is no coexistence with humanity. There's only one will win and one will lose. So has Apocalypse been correct? It's hard to conjugate words in the past impossible never tense.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because in a way, Apocalypse is always kind of right. Only the strong survive. Only the strongest survive. I think maybe he wasn't right in that he was assuming that the mutants would prove to be the strongest.
Right.
But he's right in his evolutionary pragmatism, I guess.
How about you, James? What do you think?
So I'm going to say no, only because it seems almost as if Apocalypse has come around to whatever the larger plan is. And I think it's that they're trying to create the perfect timeline, or the perfect outcome for both humanity and X-Men. With the ending of this book, Wolverine finds Moira, gives her all the information from up until this point in the timeline and or this version of her life, right? And says, this one's kind of a dud. You're going to have to move on to the next one, but here's all this stuff you need. Right?
Wait,
so
hold on. I take major exception from your... he's like, so your life is kind of a dud. No, that's not what's happening here. They planned this.
Yeah, this was always the plan. They were doing a suicide mission to get this information.
Yeah.
And then the whole plan was to send Moira back with this so that in her next life
they would have the information to take out Nimrod for good. So I have 2 answers to this. Yes and no. One, Apocalypse is sort of right in that, yes, ultimately it came down to a final drag-out fight with humanity, and only the strongest survive, and it's going to be a conflict. But I would make the argument that the aggressive stance that Apocalypse and other mutants take might be the reason why humanity fears and loathes them and doesn't trust them and what have you. The tagline for X-Men. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy is what
Possibly.
I think we're experiencing in this series.
I don't know that we know enough about this past timeline to know that, though. Because we've never really seen anything about what the inciting incident is that really starts humanity hating mutants.
No, we do, kind of. So we've seen a decent amount of what's going on in X1 or in X0. We see when Xavier's first coming up with the ideas of humanity and mutants living together, and the resistance he gets when mutants try to form their own nation. So I don't think this timeline starts off with mutants trying to form their own nation. They're definitely reacting.
Yeah.
They're saying mutants have always been treated terribly, and we're being hunted, and we're being persecuted, so we need to form our own nation. And one of the reasons that the very act of trying to form their own nation inspires Orchrus to go into space and build Mother Mold, or to effectively make Nimrod to effectively wipe out all mutants, because humanity is afraid of being wiped out by mutants. So it's like this endless cycle of mutants taking an aggressive stand because humans took an aggressive stand, but humans took an aggressive stand because mutants are taking an aggressive stand. That seems to be the loop that we're arguably even in the real world stuck in, where you can't determine who's the beginner, who initiates the conflict that's going to destroy us. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is we do see what happens in this story 1,000 years in the future, and it seems like things kind of worked out. Maybe it's hard to say, but certainly
it depends on your point of view. Because
all of this depends on your point of view.
I guess there's no conflict on Earth at the moment,
but arguably,
it appears that Earth has been reduced to a single artificial hive mind, essentially.
But is that evolution? Is that good? Is that something that Apocalypse would be happy with? And do we want something that Apocalypse would be happy with? It seems like everybody's kind of in that timeline is very much like, how do we ever let it get this bad? Whenever they look through historical artifacts. But also, I wouldn't necessarily want to live in that world. It's very interesting, and I think maybe the point is us asking these questions. So for those of you who are looking at the future where this storyline goes and are wondering, are we going to get a satisfying conclusion? I don't know if there is a satisfying conclusion, just like I don't know if there's a satisfying answer to who started the blank real-world conflict, right? I just think it's just bad. I think it's just conflict. Well, yeah, they're the worst. And actually, we're all right. That's it. But yeah, so I think it's a very complicated question with a very unresolvable answer. But it's interesting. It's interesting that we're using X-Men to tell this kind of story. So ultimately, like we already kind of teased at, the plot of this is that the whole thing, everything we've seen in the 100-year timeline, has been a attempt to get information on the probable origins of Nimrod into Moira X, really.
Yeah.
And sending her
next lifetime.
Yeah, sending her off to her next reincarnation and hoping for the best.
And we found out that this is her 9th lifetime.
Yeah.
And she's sent into the 10th, which is, we already know, established current timeline.
The one where
the one we've been reading.
Right. The one in House of
and everything. The one that we've been reading since 1963, when the X-Men first debuted.
Wow. So that twist? It wasn't super complicated, but it wonderfully for me built out on the way House of X and Powers of 10 weave together. I really enjoyed that linchpin of connecting the two, saying this is where they connect. Mm-hmm. I thought it was pretty ingenious and fun.
I loved the moment where Wolverine kills Moira.
What a horrible thing to say, but yeah.
I just think it was a horrible thing to do, but the only way to do what needed to be done.
Right.
And the way they put it, it's the title of the story of this issue, and it's also what Moira says to Wolverine is, this is what you do. Mm-hmm. It's like Wolverine is a killer.
Right.
Yeah, and he's the best there is at what he does. So of course it would be Wolverine that has to send her off into her next life.
Interesting. And now does this bring about peace or war? We don't know because we haven't found out yet.
Nope, it ends right there.
Yeah, James, what did you think of that reveal?
I'm with Pete. I loved it. It was perfect, and it's very poetic. to me, it might foreshadow that there's more timeline trickery afoot, right? I think we are, as Pete says, led to believe that the current timeline we're reading is the X-Men timeline we've had since X time or whatever. But I don't know. I'm wondering if maybe there's a twist hidden in there somewhere.
It's possible. It's possible.
Right. So let's review the book. I really enjoyed this a lot. I'm going to give this one a near mint, especially because of the way it connects all the different threads of the stories together. I like it. Pete?
Again, very solid, good story. A lot more of a concrete storyline to follow than other Powers of X. So I will. Nothing really huge stood out for me, though. So I'm going to agree with you in near mint.
All right, and James.
I'm about the same as you guys. I think it's a lot more for me to latch onto than other Powers of X. I like the poetic stuff with Logan and Moira and everything. But it still has some of the problems that the Powers of X have had so far, still being a little confusing and hard to follow. Near mint.
Wow, we got a triple near mint.
Unanimous.
Yeah, that's our first one for this line. Although I think some books have scored on average higher. But you nerds have to do the math on that one. I'm excited to keep reading more. I know there are bigger twists coming up and more interesting developments for both lines. Our next episode is going to come up really soon. We're actually posting these multiple times a week until we get caught up with the series, which will hopefully be sometime next week or the week after.
Should be.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Near Mint, please like and follow and subscribe so you get the latest episode in the podcatcher of your choice, and leave us a good review so other people can find out about the show. Thank you all, and see you next time.
This has been a non-productive media presentation. Executive producer Frank Hablawi. This program and many others like it on the Non-Productive Network is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Please share it, but ask before trying to change it or sell it. For more information, visit non-productive.com.